this new energy access project that we're launching today. The history of it is Duke had an energy poverty course a couple years ago. There might actually be some students in this room that took that course. And it's kind of a capstone to it in looking at how do we continue to keep this energy going, so to speak, and build and institutionalize programming around this. This idea of the Energy Access Project was hatched. And I really think the competitive advantage, the case for it, is that we have this excellent interdisciplinary faculty and staff research that's existed at Duke for several years. And we have the opportunity to sort of add this policymaker and practitioner-focused engagement piece to it to really make this program as kind of real-world applicable as possible. So at the end of the day, we're trying to provide investors, policymakers, developers, community groups, local communities, civil society organizations, understand the problems that you're seeing in the field and really try to plug in and add value where we can and where our capacities match up. So you'll be hearing more about this, more about our work and our people and some projects that we're getting off the ground now a little bit later. But we're here, today in sort of a modest approach of, please tell us what you see the opportunities are. How can we collaborate together? And how can we make this project something that, fills in what's needed and that you all are seeing in the field? So thanks again for being here. I want to have Jim Rogers come and give a few remarks. I met Jim about a decade ago now. I was working on the climate bill in 2009, and Jim doesn't take on small challenges. At that point, he was the chairman and CEO of Duke Energy, one of the biggest private utility companies in the country. And Jim brokered the deal pretty much to get the private utility industry on board with an aggressive, ambitious climate bill that ultimately would lead to an 80% reduction in global warming emissions, which at the time was kind of an unthinkable kind of political alignment. We had the great fortune at Duke to host Jim and his sort of life after Duke Energy and be a base for his exploration of energy access. He wrote a book, Lighting the World, that I think has helped to build a vision and build a larger community around this project. And that class that I mentioned is sort of the basis for the Energy Access Project. That was a class that was taught by Jim and Tim Profeta, who's the director of the Energy Institute, or the Nicholas Institute at Duke. So we're so happy to have him part of our community. Jim, please join me in warmly welcoming Jim Rogers, our friend and visionary. Thank you, sir.
Good morning. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm really delighted to see all of y'all here on this kind of not a perfect morning, but having lived in Washington for a decade, this is a normal, unfortunately, winter morning, not spring or fall, which are beautiful here, but I'm delighted that y'all are here. My hope is through the sharing of all our individual experiences that we can collectively build the capability to really accelerate our efforts to address this issue. And that's kind of my hope for y'all today. I'll be here, I'll be part of it. I know you've never seen a CEO that rolls his sleeves up and does real work. I never did when I was a CEO, but I'm doing it now. But let me just start out by sharing with y'all the headlines. Y'all know the headlines. I think the solutions are in the nuance, but we always have to kind of remind us of the magnitude of the problem. So one of the headlines to me is more than 1.1 billion people, no access to electricity. And quite frankly, nobody wants a KWH. Nobody even knows in the US what a KWH is. But what they really care about is energy services, whether it's lighting or charging or refrigeration or washing and drying of clothes. I mean, these are the things that people want, and we can't forget in the provision of electricity that what we're really doing is providing services. That resonates with people. And it's just not providing electricity to a residential community, but equally maybe more important for the economic development of a community is providing electricity to irrigation, to some of the businesses, milling, go through the list, to really kind of grow and develop and produce jobs and growth within the community. We won't talk about this today, but I think it's equally important to understand more than 1 billion people are connected to the grid but get unreliable, unpredictable electricity. And that really hampers the growth in some of these areas. And let me just kind of step away as we kind of have those headlines to give you 2 more headlines that really exacerbate the challenge that we have. If you look at the population growth worldwide, we're going to go from about 7.3 billion people today to roughly 9.8 billion people by 2050. Now that's going to put a huge, huge stress on energy, water, food, education, health, huge stress. And I've come to believe, from talking to a lot of smart people around the world, that getting it right with respect to access to electricity increases the probability you can solve water and food and other problems. I've always been kind of stunning to me that people that talk about these health issues and all these other issues in low-income countries never, ever really kind of back up and say, but they don't have electricity. And that blind spot, maybe because all of us in high-income countries, electricity is ubiquitous, it's back of mind. We don't really think about the role that it plays in our own society. And so we forget the role that it may play there. But I think to get it right on these other issues. And if you think about increasing the population 2.5 billion, put that, and this is a great factoid, there were only 1 billion people on Earth in 1800, a little over 200 years. And now we're looking at such a huge increase in people. The fastest growth is in the low-income countries around the world. And the fastest growth is in sub-Saharan Africa. What we're really looking at is maybe 1 billion people added to sub-Saharan Africa between now and 2050. And I think that's a remarkable fact. I mean, IEA points out that today there's more of 600 million people with no access to electricity there. And by 2040, they predict, even with all the good efforts, all the work that's being done, all the creativity, all the support of the government or not, depending on the country, but with all those efforts, there'll still be 500 million in 2040 with no access. I think that's unacceptable. And I think what we have to do is be highly motivated to go about solving that problem in the future. I think the other thing that I would point out is that the other demographic is a shift from rural areas to urban areas. In the US and other high-income countries, we're almost at that 70-30, where 70% of the people live here. But if you look at the world statistic simply says that 50% of the people in the world live in urban areas. Where it's really going to go from rural to urban is really in the low-income countries. You can see it in sub-Saharan Africa happening. All you have to do is be in Kenya and walk through Kibera. People come from the rural part of the country, they go to Kibera. If you ever walk through what the government calls, kind of interestingly, an informal settlement, I don't know what the hell that means. It's a slum to me when you walk through it, and I just walked through it in the last couple of weeks. If we can provide electricity to the rural areas, and we're thinking about it, that may well slow down this migration to the urban areas, especially if we can create jobs and opportunities for people in those areas. Now, I kind of believe that there may be lessons we can learn from China and the US. And it may be a simple lesson of what not to do. I mean, China did a remarkable thing, lifting 400 million people from poverty into the middle class, but they built a zillion coal plants, increased emissions dramatically of CO2 to do it. I wouldn't suggest for a minute that that's the right approach to solve the problem in these areas. But it's a lesson learned. I'm not sure I'd dam up a river and create a 22,000 megawatt hydro facility. I mean, that's huge. I mean, to put it in context, that's more megawatts that are needed to supply the whole state of North Carolina for electricity. So, but in the US, there may be lessons, not clear what the lessons are, but I think it's worth paying attention to how electrification started in the early 1900s to see if we can draw any conclusion from that. I think what I see when I look around the world and I talk to people is that we're testing different technologies and different business models. I'm not clear what the roadmap will be. Y'all will figure that out. I'm not clear that we're either on the right path. But I look at solar lanterns and the role they play on the first rung of the solar ladder. I look at home solar system and pay-as-you-go. I look at microgrids and I go, microgrids, not so much in East Africa because of the way the population is set up, primarily in India where there's greater density in the villages as well as the potential in West Africa. But at the end of the day, microgrids will play a really important role. And just as a footnote, electrification of the US really started with a series of microgrids around the country that were interconnected and built larger plants to reduce the unit cost with this relentless focus on affordability in the US. And that might be the best lesson we can take, not the building of coal plants, but the relentless focus on affordability. And that's what we have to have in terms of getting this done in all these countries. You know, you can't imagine, I mean, the technology's there. Solar prices are falling, wind prices are falling, storage kind of uncertain, but I'm a technology optimist. I believe those costs will come down, the efficiency will improve, and they will enhance our capability to use renewables in these remote areas. I think that, think about it. I mean, who would have guessed 10 years ago that cell phones and mobile banking would be key to the electrification in East Africa? Nobody would have guessed that that technology would help drive the electrification of that region of the world. And I just wonder what technology is coming that will allow us to accelerate that going forward. Now, let me say that I believe that y'all know the challenges, but let me do it at 60,000 feet because I kind of operate in that world. Actually, I fly a lot, and I think better at 35,000 feet. I think it's the oxygen deprivation I enjoy. But let me just kind of give you my view of the challenges. Government policy. You know, if you put tariffs on solar panels, you're going to slow down the deployment in the country. And it's actually not so much the policy that's being implemented, it's the policy that's not being implemented that I think is really critical. Investment, capital. I mean, the power sector in high-income countries is the most capital-intensive industry in the world, and you need more capital to really drive this in low-income countries. Limited capability to pay is a huge issue, although one of the byproducts of providing electricity, particularly pay-as-you-go model, is building a credit history that will expand the capability of people to really want more services in the future and to kind of move more and more into a 21st century world. We talked about technologies. I think progress is being made. More needs to get done. And I guess the last thing, and this is kind of, I can say it, but I haven't lived it, so I don't know, but it's really capacity building in these individual communities and capacity building at the universities within these countries. That's really critical because it leverages the capability of people on the ground to really move forward and to lead in these areas. And let me just emphasize one more time, it's just not about residential customers, it's about building access to electricity to drive the growth in the economy and the building of businesses. You know, let me just share with you 2 stories before I wrap it up. And by the way, I come into this, I had some trepidation about talking to y'all this morning, because I look across the room, and I know some of you, I know everybody in this room probably knows more than I do. So that's kind of a tough place to talk. But let me just share with you an experience that I had. I just returned from 2 weeks in East Africa. I'm the vice chairman of the Global Board of the Nature Conservancy. So I really care about that set of issues and the impact it has really on electrification. And I was there, I was primarily in Western Tanzania, Mahali Mountains, Lake Tanganyika, and visited some of the villages there. I was there kind of in my role with the Nature Conservancy, focused on water, focused on sustainable fishery. But quickly, I mean, we met with the mayors of 3 small villages, not so small, over 12,000 people, working on these issues, talking, sharing ideas. And it became crystal clear to me that none of them had electricity. They still all use kerosene. And I'm going, oh my goodness. And I just kind of mentioned that I had some, interest in electrification and blah, blah, blah. And then I ended up being pulled from the group and meeting with the key leadership of all these villages about what could I do to really address this issue, and it would help them solve these other issues if there was a way to bring electricity to these villages. And that was, I mean, they got it. Everybody had a cell phone, by the way. Not crystal clear how they charged it. But the bottom line is I walked out of that experience with those people with a sense of urgency that went way beyond the sense of urgency that I walked into that village with, or those villages. Another kind of experience that I've recently had, the week before that, I was in Guatemala and in Mayan villages in the northern part of the country. To give you a sense of how remote this is, you have to drive 8 hours from Antigua to get to these remote villages. And most of the people there are really kind of farming and nurturing the coffee plants and in that kind of business. And the concept of a village in northern Guatemala is fundamentally different than my concept of a village, because people are spread out all over mountains. They're really truly farmers. I mean, I know farming, and that kind of is a farming area. And I was there with Global Bright Light. It's an organization that I helped co-found. I co-founded it maybe 6 years ago. We distributed maybe 75,000 solar lanterns, some in refugee camps in Africa. But our focus now is really more on Guatemala and some of the countries in Latin America. And I saw in these Mayan villages, I really saw the desire to have these lanterns. They were excited about getting them. And because they could charge their cell phones, they had good light, they could walk away from the use of kerosene, or candles. And the same story there as in Western Tanzania. There they had several homes burned down because of the use of kerosene. They had the same problem with children being burned with candles within these homes. And so they had a sense of urgency and a desire to make investments in bringing electricity to their homes, bringing lighting service and charging service for their phones. That again, I kind of left there with a greater sense of urgency about solving the problem. Now, let me just also say, I've been working with Duke for a number of years now. I worked at Duke Energy, and then I moved to Duke University. It was really easy with my business cards. I just marked out energy, wrote in university, changed my cell phone number, and I was good to go. Pretty cost-effective transition for me. But as Jonathan mentioned Tim and I co-taught this course. Nobody had ever taught a course like this, and we had to kind of make it up and get the material and think about the structure, and it really helped us to really go deeper. Plus, here's the thing that was remarkable about our class. I mean, I traveled all over the country. Every university talks about interdisciplinary approaches. Here I'm teaching a graduate school course, and students from 5 different schools, from the law school, from the business school, from environmental science, from engineering, all these different schools, all these different students there focused on solving this problem. And one of the things that we did is that we wanted them to understand the challenge of energy access, how it's going on around the world. And then our challenge to them was to break out into groups, build business plans. We wanted to inspire them and give them the capability to go build a business to solve this problem. And I see some of our students in the room here, and I was amazed at kind of the level of energy and commitment to really going to work in this area and transforming what's going on. The other thing we did at Duke is that we had these case competitions, and they were on energy access. It started out maybe with only 12 different schools around the country. Up to 40 schools in the last rounds have kind of raised their hand and said, we'd like to send a team. We'd like to work on an energy access case. We had Copa Solar as kind of one of our case studies. We've had off-grid electric. We've even kind of focused on how do you transform the energy system in Cuba, as a for instance. Did that all before the prior election, I might add. But the important point here is I believe that Duke is probably one of the best schools in the country to go to work on this problem because they bring the energy and the capability from lots of different schools to work on this. Because it's not just a public policy question, not just an engineering question, not just a business question. It's kind of all these things kind of tied together going forward. So I'm really kind of happy to be part of their team. You know, I think that I feel like I've spent most of my life preparing to work on this challenge. I mean, I kind of wish I look out there saying, if I could be the average age of this group, I'd have a little more time, but I'm not. Although I'm working hard to do that transformation. But I really believe that I look at what I did as a CEO. I spent my time educating and engaging policymakers to address issues. Jonathan talked about the work I did with climate change, but I did on a lot of different issues. I spent most of my time trying to expand the services we supply to customers. I focused on scaling our business, because I knew scaling is really critical to this area. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I mean, I combined 4 companies, but at the end of the day, you've got to pull these efforts together and build the kind of scale that you can get the kind of funding you need. I spent a lot of time on my knees on Wall Street. I used to laugh and say, I really had these special Brooks Brothers suits made with knee pads. It worked well before regulators, as I kind of bent down and said, help me. Or I was going to the investment community and say, give me $10 billion, I need the money. But at the end of the day, I kind of learned to do that interaction. And I actually, unlike most utilities in the country, we had assets in 17 different countries, from hydroelectric to gas in Pakistan and Turkey and Africa, Latin America. So I've spent some time and understood the cultural differences, but maybe also understood the government differences in those areas. All the time having a really keen focus on profitability. So all those experiences, I feel like if I want to put them back to use to solve this problem. That this problem's got to be solved. And I'm not sure, I know y'all are the right people. I just want to roll up my sleeves and be working side by side with y'all to go to work on this and really make a difference in the future. So thank y'all for being here. Thank you for your commitment to this challenge. And I'm going to be there with you, not at 60,000 feet, but I really want my sleeves rolled up on the ground. Thank y'all very much.